It began with a single wire transfer, one that should never have existed. In the sleepless heart of Mexico City, a quiet accountant pressed a button that moved millions across oceans and sealed his fate. What if the man behind those numbers held the power to destroy the very empire he built? And what if he finally chose to? Beneath neon lights and champagne laughter, Alejandro Cruz balanced the ledgers of a kingdom of blood, each digit another life paid for in silence. He believed he was invisible, untouchable. But on that night, the numbers betrayed him. Somewhere deep within the cartel's digital vault, an error appeared. A single red flag, blinking like a heartbeat. Within hours, the men who trusted him would turn into the men hunting him. And in that moment, as the city glowed beneath the rain, the accountant who knew too much stopped being a man and became a target. By dawn, the city had forgotten the storm. But inside Alejandro's office, silence carried a different weight. The kind that follows when someone knows they've made an irreversible mistake. The cartel's accounts were pristine on the surface, yet the transfer trail led somewhere forbidden. An offshore vault tied to a name that didn't exist. Every number he saw now looked like evidence, every silence like a threat. He replayed the transaction again and again, trying to convince himself it was a glitch, but he knew better. The moment he tried to cover the error, new eyes were already watching. Somewhere, a call had been made. Somewhere, someone was asking why the accountant hadn't slept. In the luxury district of Polanco, Rafael Ortega arrived unannounced. His presence filled rooms like smoke, calm, suffocating, impossible to ignore. Alejandro had seen that look before, the one that meant questions were about to turn into orders. Rafael spoke softly as if discussing wine, not betrayal. "You made a mistake," he said. Alejandro nodded, not daring to ask how Rafael already knew. Numbers were supposed to be silent, loyal. But in their world, even digits could bleed secrets. By afternoon, Alejandro's phone buzzed with a single encrypted message. Audit initiated. In the cartel's code, it meant more than numbers. It meant loyalty was being measured, life by life. He deleted it instantly, but his hands trembled. Somewhere between calculation and confession, he'd crossed a line. He realized too late that every ledger he ever balanced had been a trap waiting to close. Night returned, quiet and heavy. Alejandro packed a small drive into his jacket. The only thing that could prove his innocence, or end him faster. The rain had stopped, but the streets below still gleamed with the night's memory. Somewhere beyond the neon haze, engines started, tires rolled, and the hunt began. For the first time, Alejandro understood what it meant to live inside a countdown. And as he stepped into the elevator, he didn't look back. Before Alejandro Cruz became the cartel's silent architect, he was just another accountant trying to pay his bills. Years before the red flag, before the blood on the books, his hands were clean and his conscience clear. He started with good intentions, make the system work for him, not against him. But the deeper he dove into offshore accounts and shell companies, the more invisible he became. That invisibility was intoxicating. It wasn't long before men with dark suits and darker promises took notice. What begins as a favor for a friend soon becomes a favor for the cartel. And in their world, no favor ever goes unpaid. The first meeting with Rafael Ortega changed everything. The man arrived without warning, escorted by 2 bodyguards who didn't speak a word. Rafael didn't need to. His watch alone could buy the building Alejandro worked in. He slid a folder across the desk. Inside were numbers, clean and simple, yet worth more than Alejandro's life. Rafael asked him one question. "Can you make this disappear?" Alejandro didn't answer. He just opened a spreadsheet, adjusted a formula, and in that instant his life split in 2. Before and after the numbers. Money came faster than guilt. Alejandro bought a new office, new clothes, and new rules for himself. He convinced his wife Valentina that his firm had landed a powerful client, foreign investors, he called them. But late at night, when the city slept, he stayed awake laundering millions through fake corporations and offshore trusts. What once felt like a favor now felt like power. Power with no face, no morality. Just numbers obeying his command. With every transaction, Alejandro drifted further from the man he used to be. Rafael rewarded him handsomely. Villas, cars, offshore accounts in his name. Yet each reward was a chain disguised as gold. Soon Alejandro wasn't just moving money, he was moving blood money. And when he saw the first expense labeled as cleanup, he didn't ask questions. Because in this business, knowing too much was the first step toward dying too soon. Years later, Alejandro would remember this moment. The night he realized he'd built a cage of numbers around himself. The power, the luxury, the fear, all perfectly balanced until one mistake tipped the scale. The empire he helped create would one day consume him. But back then, he still believed in control. He still believed he could keep his hands clean. That was before the audit. Before the betrayal. Before the day his own numbers came back to kill him. It started with whispers, the kind that moved faster than bullets. $40 million had vanished from Rafael's empire, and trust was now worth less than a peso. Alejandro knew the books were clean, but in their world, proof didn't matter. Only loyalty did. The cartel's enforcers began to circle, quiet and patient. Alejandro's phone stopped ringing. Friends avoided eye contact. He was no longer part of the system. He was the system's next audit. In desperation, he did the unthinkable. He began keeping his own secret ledger, hidden deep in encrypted files, documenting every crime I'd ever helped bury. For the first time, the accountant stopped protecting the cartel and started protecting himself. Each entry he wrote was a confession, a quiet rebellion typed in code. But secrets that dangerous have gravity. They pull attention. Rafael's inner circle began their own investigation, sending auditors who carried guns instead of calculators. Every whisper of suspicion pointed back to Alejandro. He noticed a black car parked across the street for 3 nights straight. The message was clear, they knew. And the countdown had begun. Rafael summoned him to the villa. The air inside felt colder than the marble floors. "Someone's been talking," Rafael said, his tone calm, eyes unblinking. Alejandro felt the lie forming in his throat before he spoke it. "Not me." Rafael smiled faintly. The kind of smile that ended conversations and lives alike. "Then prove it," he said. That night, Alejandro realized the ledger wasn't just protection anymore. It was leverage. But leverage in the wrong hands was suicide. As paranoia spread, Alejandro turned to the only person he thought he could trust, his bodyguard, Diego Vargas. Diego had been with him for years, loyal, silent, protective. Alejandro showed him part of the ledger, told him it was an insurance policy. Diego didn't ask questions, but something in his eyes had changed. A quiet fear, maybe guilt. Alejandro should have seen it then. Diego wasn't protecting him anymore. He was protecting himself. Days later, the first warning came. A message slipped under his door. "Stop counting." The handwriting was familiar, steady, and deliberate. Alejandro knew what it meant. Someone close had turned. The numbers that once built his empire now mapped the path to his destruction. He burned everything he could. Papers, drives, backups. But the truth has a way of surviving fire. And as the smoke rose through the vents of his apartment, Alejandro realized that the code of silence wasn't about loyalty. It was about fear. The kind that never dies, only changes names. When the walls began to close in, Alejandro made the only move left. He reached out to the enemy. A single encrypted message was sent to an unknown contact at the US Embassy. "I can give you everything." He didn't expect an answer, but within hours, one came. It was short, cold, and direct. "Meet at dawn. Meet at dawn. Bring proof." For the first time, Alejandro dared to believe escape was possible. But in the world he built, every deal came with a price, and every exit had a gun waiting at the door. The next morning, Alejandro drove through empty streets toward the border. He carried only one thing, a flash drive with the ledger. Every line of code was a confession, every name a death sentence. He didn't see the unmarked SUV tailing him 2 blocks behind. Inside it, Diego Vargas sat in silence, ordered to watch him. Betrayal doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers over static-filled radios. He met the contact in a quiet diner near the border. A woman who introduced herself as Sofia. Her badge said FBI, but her eyes said exhaustion. She'd seen too many men like him, all promising redemption wrapped in lies. Alejandro slid the flash drive across the table. "This will burn everything," he said. She looked at him for a long moment before replying, "Then you'd better be ready to burn too." By nightfall, the news had already reached Rafael. The accountant had spoken. The order was simple: find him before he crosses the line. Diego got the call in a parking lot, the voice on the other end calm as a prayer. He hesitated, just for a breath, before agreeing. He knew what it meant. Loyalty had expired. Friendship had become evidence. The hunt had begun. Hours later, Alejandro stood at a motel window watching headlights pass like ghosts. The flash drive was gone, handed to Sofia. Yet he couldn't shake the feeling he'd traded one death sentence for another. He checked his gun, zipped his jacket, and packed his passport. Tomorrow, he'd cross the border. But as he turned off the light, he caught something in the window's reflection. A shadow moving behind him. The door creaked open. He didn't have time to reach for the gun. The gun pressed against the back of Alejandro's neck was cold, steady, and familiar. Diego's voice broke the silence. "I told them I'd bring you in alive," he whispered, his tone trembling between regret and fear. Alejandro didn't move. "You shouldn't have come," he said quietly. Years of friendship collapsed into that one breath. Trust, once priceless, now weighed less than survival. Diego's orders were simple: deliver the accountant, erase the ledger, and disappear. But deep down, he knew no one ever disappears from the cartel. Not really. They drove in silence through the desert, headlights carving a thin path through endless sand. Alejandro stared ahead, his mind running faster than the engine. "They'll kill you too," he finally said. Diego kept his eyes on the road. "I know," he muttered. Somewhere between fear and loyalty, 2 men shared the same fate, one sentenced by guilt, the other by obedience. The closer they got to the border, the quieter the night became, as if the world itself was holding its breath. The ambush came without warning. Headlights appeared behind them, then bullets ripped through the silence. Diego swerved. Glass shattered, tires screamed. Alejandro ducked low as gunfire lit up the desert. The cartel wasn't taking chances. No witnesses, no confessions. As the SUV crashed into a ditch, the sound of burning metal filled the night. Alejandro crawled out, bloodied but alive, clutching his passport and a single photo of Valentina. Behind him, Diego's body slumped over the steering wheel, his eyes still open, staring into the sand. Alejandro stumbled through the desert, guided only by moonlight and desperation. Every step felt heavier, every breath sharper. In the distance, border lights flickered like salvation, or an illusion. His thoughts blurred between memory and confession. The money, the lies, the deaths. He'd tried to buy redemption with data. But in the cartel's world, nothing ever balances. Not even forgiveness. He reached the border fence just before dawn. Weak, bleeding, but still moving. He could almost hear Valentina's voice, soft, distant, calling his name. Then came the final sound. A single gunshot echoing across the desert. When the patrol arrived hours later, all they found was blood, a torn passport, and footprints that ended in the dust. The flash drive was gone. Somewhere out there, someone else had taken it. The last transaction was complete, but the balance was far from settled. By the time the sun rose, the cartel had already begun to erase him. His apartment was stripped bare, his accounts frozen, his name deleted from every record that ever mattered. In Mexico City, Rafael Ortega gathered his lieutenants around the long marble table and spoke 3 words. Erase the accountant. The empire Alejandro built now turned its machinery against him, cleaning up the blood he left behind, silencing every whisper, burning every trace. But the ledger couldn't be erased. Somewhere in the cloud his truth still lived, waiting to resurface. Valentina had vanished weeks earlier, taken in silence like a ghost, erased from a photo. Neighbors said she left suddenly. No bags, no goodbyes. But deep in a hidden server her name appeared, part of a transfer labeled collateral. Alejandro's family had become another line item in the cartel's balance sheet. Love, loyalty, grief, all reduced to transactions. The men who killed for money were now killing for order. In Washington, Sofia Morales stared at the flash drive that arrived in an unmarked envelope. Inside, the encrypted ledger flickered to life. Account numbers, offshore names, politicians, even law enforcement officials. It was bigger than she imagined. And it came at a cost. "Where's the source?" her partner asked. Sophia looked down, silent. She already knew the answer. The file was proof of everything, except the man who gave it to her. When Raphael learned the ledger had resurfaced, fury turned to fear. For the first time, the kingpin understood that his empire wasn't collapsing from outside. It was rotting from within. The accountant's death was supposed to end the problem, not immortalize it. Find it, Raphael ordered, voice calm but shaking underneath. And whoever has it, make sure they disappear. The hunt began again, not for a man, but for a ghost hidden in the code. The blood trail stretched across borders. Witnesses silenced, accounts deleted, servers wiped. But still, fragments of the ledger surfaced online in small bursts. A senator's offshore account here, a secret deal there. Someone was leaking it piece by piece. Sophia traced the signal to a remote server farm outside Monterrey. As she approached, sirens filled the night. She realized the cartel wasn't trying to hide the truth anymore. It was trying to bury everyone chasing it. The raid on the Monterrey server farm was supposed to end it, but it only opened another door. As Sophia stepped into the room, she found screens flickering with the same encrypted code that haunted Alejandro's final nights. The files were spreading, copied into thousands of anonymous accounts. His ledger had become a virus, one that could no longer be contained. The accountant who tried to destroy the cartel had become its ghost in the machine. In death, he had done what he couldn't in life, made the truth impossible to kill. As the data spread, powerful men across continents began to vanish. Bankers, lawyers, politicians. Their empires crumbled without warning. In the shadows, Raphael watched everything he'd built unravel one file at a time. He'd killed to protect his empire, but the numbers refused to die with the bodies. For the first time, the cartel boss who ruled through fear faced something far worse: exposure. In Washington, Sophia presented what was left of the ledger to her superiors. "This isn't evidence," one of them said coldly. "It's chaos." She looked at the folder labeled Cruz, Alejandro, and realized the truth. Systems don't change because of truth. They change because of pressure. The accountant's sacrifice would only matter if someone dared to finish what he started. Sophia made a silent promise. The story wouldn't die buried in files. It would burn its way into daylight. Months later, the mysterious email reached major news outlets around the world. Attached was a single document: the accountant's ledger. Within hours, headlines exploded. Governments denied, banks panicked, and billions vanished overnight. Somewhere in the chaos, Sophia watched the world finally face the truth one man had died for. And though Alejandro's body was gone, his voice, written in numbers and silence, spoke louder than ever. In a quiet cemetery outside Mexico City, an unmarked grave sits beneath a single oak tree. No flowers, no name. Just silence. A USB drive lies buried beneath the soil. Still encrypted, still alive. The cartel has rebuilt new faces in old positions, but the fear remains. Because somewhere in some forgotten corner of the digital world, Alejandro Cruz still waits. Not as a man, but as a warning. The numbers don't lie. They never did. And those who read them too closely never live long enough to forget.